The state rests.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Blake. Mr. Archibald, upon consultation with your client, would you please advise the court on how the defense is proceeding at this time?
Your Honor, after consultation with my client, we don't believe the state has proven its case, so the defense rests.
State and defense rest in the trial of Lori Vallow Daybell, the Doomsday cult mom. I'm Anjanette Levy, and welcome to the Lunch Show Q&A here on Law and Crime. We are so happy that you're joining us for this hour. We want you to submit your questions to us on Twitter and Facebook and in the YouTube chat, and we'll get to as many of them as we can over the next hour. And we have a great panel to take all of your questions. With me in New York is Linda Kenny-Bodden, a host here at the Law and Crime Network, and in Boise, Idaho, outside of the Ada County Courthouse, where closing arguments will be heard tomorrow. In Lori Vallow Daybell's case is Gigi McKelvey of Law and Crime and Law and Crime's executive producer, Kathy Russin. We have the dream team down there on the ground. There are two people on this earth who know everything about this case, and it's Gigi and Kathy. So we're going to get to your questions in just a minute. But first, we want to show you some new video that we've received. And this is video that was discussed during the trial just recently when Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow Daybell were in Hawaii. Remember, they got married there and kind of just hung out there for quite some time while poor little JJ Vallow and Tylee Ryan were missing, and they were dead unbeknownst to everybody. Well, she was served with some papers there, and it was captured on body camera. So let's take a look.
How's it going? Are you Chad, Lori? This is all agent, sir.
Do you have any questions regarding that?
So it is 14:39 hours on January 25th.
Do you need something?
Any questions?
You have any questions for that? No?
Okay.
Okay.
All right, have a nice day.
Have a nice day.
So there you have it. We've heard about that moment, and now we are seeing it for the first time. And I want to know what Gigi and Kathy have to say about this. You know, Gigi, first to you. We knew that this happened, but we haven't seen it until now. So your thoughts on that video and the reactions of both Lori and Chad.
Yeah, it's interesting because Lori just looks bothered. How dare you interrupt my sunbathing to give me an order to produce my kids who are missing? And then you see Chad kind of lean in and start looking at it. He looked nervous a bit. Chad always gets nervous when law enforcement shows up. But, you know, this really, for the jury, I think, was powerful because you would see them kind of look over at Lori as this was being played. Her attitude came across loud and clear, I think, that don't bother me. Thanks for the papers, but let me get back to sunbathing.
She was definitely having a good time there sunbathing. Kathy, I know you've got something to say about this.
I mean, come on. Those two knew those kids were dead. Okay, let's just be clear. And they're just sunbathing, and Lori's reading a book, Visions of Glory, which is all about the second coming of Christ. So they're just hanging out, doing their thing, and they do. She's annoyed that she's getting served these papers. Like, why would you want me to produce my children? I don't know. I just seeing them makes my skin crawl, quite frankly.
It's one thing to hear about it, it's another to see it. And we are seeing it. You know, it's like the Memorex moment of this trial. And it's incredibly disturbing because we know at that point in time, JJ and Tylee were dead. They had been murdered, and it's horrific. Linda, as a defense attorney, you know, I mean, it's shocking to me that there's really not been much of a defense in this case other than the state didn't meet its burden. not one witness called by the defense. I mean, your thoughts, this video seems kind of like the icing on the cake with this case for the state.
Yeah, let me just start with the video and then morph into the answer to that question, Anjanette, because Gene Rossi and I discussed it earlier today. This video is devastating if you're the defense attorney, because to me, it shows that Lori Vallow Daybell is really more of the mastermind. She is the one who's sitting up, getting in her yoga pose, reading the papers. Chad is just sitting over there to the other side. Remember that these murders or homicides or deaths, because they had not been proven to be crimes yet, didn't start occurring in Chad's life until Lori Vallow Daybell appeared. And these are her children that she is reading about and still, having the suntan lotion on. So if you're a defense attorney, you can't anger that jury anymore by trying to put on certain witnesses. You're going to have to go to mitigation when the verdict comes down and have all the evidence presented about her mental history, which will include her incompetence without telling the jury that she was incompetent at one point to stand trial. That's where you have to go.
And really, it's going to be in the judge's hands, say she is convicted. If the jury does indeed convict her of any of these counts, it'll be in the judge's hands because, there's no sentencing phase. They're not seeking the death penalty anymore. Let's get to those questions now. This first one, Gigi, is for you. It's from YouTube, and it's from Kadobi1. Why was Melanie Bedreau-Pawlowski not allowed to testify? So we want to know from you, since you've been sitting in that courtroom where cameras were not allowed, what happened? Because everyone was looking forward to her testimony when they saw her walk into the courthouse.
Well, my understanding of that is that the prosecution simply decided not to call her. We don't know why. Her husband, Ian, as we know, did testify briefly. And the original question was whether or not she had watched any testimony or read any articles. Witnesses are not supposed to do that. He said she did scroll through some of those headlines after her ex-husband, Brandon Boudreaux, testified. They're still tied up in litigation, so she was checking things out. I don't think that's the reason, because David Warwick, who's married to Melanie Gibb and was one of Lori's best friends, Melanie Gibb was, he watched testimony and he was allowed to testify. So I kind of think maybe it's an emotional wild card with her. She just thought Lori hung the moon, and maybe they just came down and said, we don't know what to expect with her on the stand. But she's not in contempt. She's not in trouble. She was told to leave, never released from that subpoena, but obviously never testified.
Well, and they may not have needed her. Maybe they felt like, we've done what we need to do, and we don't need her testimony. It could have been as simple as that. Paul S. asks, can you please discuss Lori's jail conditions and daily life there? Who is visiting her? What is she allowed to do? Kathy, do you have any information about that?
I don't have really any information about that, but I do not believe she's getting visitors. Gigi may have some more on that.
Gigi, have you heard anything about it?
I don't think they have in-person visits there in Madison County. They do have the tablets where you can do the voice calls and the video calls with people that the inmate approves to receive those messages from. We haven't heard of anybody visiting her. Now, the jail she's at is very tiny. It's going to be a big difference if she's convicted and sent to prison. The food at this jail is supposed to be amazing. It's kind of quiet. It's small. Prison's going to be a big wake-up call, because she's going to be in there with a lot of women who do not like women who hurt their children.
Well, and if Lori indeed goes to prison, and it seems likely that she may, just based on the lack of defense in this case. I mean, obviously, we're not on the jury. Yeah, prison's a whole different ballgame. And, she may be put in, what they call administrative segregation or solitary confinement for her own protection. We saw that happen with Alec Murdaugh. Linda, we've got a question here. Kadobi1 from YouTube asks, this is a good one for you. If convicted, could Lori claim ineffective assistance of counsel, since they really didn't put up much of a defense?
Oh, well, that's like $1 million question, any ineffective assistance of counsel. First, you have to go through generally your appeals, although you can attach to an appeal on the first go-round that your counsel was ineffective. But it's very, very difficult to win unless there is somebody who knew that she was specifically, not involved in the deaths of her children, because that wouldn't apply really to the conspiracy count, because that's going to be an issue anyhow. But very, very, very difficult.
It's always a very high bar with ineffective assistance of counsel, because they basically have to prove. It'll be on the defense if she's convicted. Her appellate attorneys will have to say the verdict would have been different had they done this or X, Y, and Z and blah, blah, blah. So very hard to get a verdict overturned based on that. This question is a good one for you, Kathy. I don't know if you know the answer, but, you are way in the weeds with this case. It's from Betty Bumbledust, and she asks, about the marks under JJ's fingernails, was there any testing to try and retrieve DNA, please? Also, thank you for the coverage of your case. We are glad to do it, Betty.
No, they couldn't get any DNA from underneath his fingernails, so none of that came into this trial.
Okay. We did hear about some other DNA evidence, though, if people recall, especially about the DNA from Lori's hair found on the duct tape on JJ, which was incredibly disturbing. Our next question will go to you, Gigi, and I think this is a good one for you since you've been in the courtroom the entire time. Live from my couch, reporting live from my couch, that's the name, asks, does Judge Boyce appear nervous with some of his rulings? He seems to have denied prosecution evidence a bit this week. Co-conspirator is already hard enough to prove. So what's Judge Boyce's demeanor been like?
Actually, he seems fine. I mean, the one thing I have noticed, he smiles a lot bigger after lunch. But for the most part, I haven't seen him really seem right, yeah. But I haven't seen him look nervous with rulings. I think he's really thinking things through before he rules, just to make sure her rights are upheld. But the things that were left out this week, it seems like they were argumentative. The slides that were going to be presented by the witnesses had a narrative to them, as opposed to just a straight timeline. So I see why those weren't allowed in. One was amended and brought in. The other one they just left out. But I have to say, the courtroom itself, this trial has run so smoothly, and there's been no hiccups. And, both sides have been respectful. There hasn't been any drama. So I think everybody's done a great job in making sure this trial runs effectively and efficiently.
That is a really good point that you make there, because we really haven't heard a whole lot of drama on those audio recordings. And obviously you're seeing what goes on in there every day. This is a good question for you, Linda. At Balanced Not from Twitter asks, could Lori's competency be called into question given how the defense didn't put on any defense? Is that a strategic move? And if so, does it benefit her?
Okay, so competency is really the issue of whether or not you can interact with your attorneys and understand the charges against you and stand trial. And there were times in her incarceration that both sides, both the scientific medical witnesses for both sides agreed that she was incompetent. But they then all agreed that she was competent to stand trial. Now, the other issue relates to that. That's the issue of insanity. Did she know right from wrong at the time that these crimes were committed? The problem with that is that Idaho does not have an insanity defense here, as we've seen in the recent case of Stout that we tried here on the network. So they really can't raise that issue in this regard. They can only raise it in regard to whether she have any mental capabilities or deficiencies in same to understand right from wrong back in 2019 when these crimes allegedly occurred.
Let's go now to a question. I'm going to basically ask all of you this question, go around the boxes, because I want to hear what all of you have to say. I know what I think about it. It's from Ramen Lover from YouTube. What kind of deal could be offered to Chad when Lori is found guilty? I should say when and if, but this viewer obviously thinks she will be found guilty. So Kathy, I'll start with you. Do you think there's any way they offer Chad Daybell a deal?
I think they could take death off the table if he would plead to it. I mean, this is costing a lot of money, and now they have to go a whole nother year before Chad goes to trial and then call the exact same witnesses and put on the exact same evidence. The interesting thing is Chad's attorney, John Pryor, has been attending almost every day in the overflow media room, so he has an inside look at all the evidence and how this is shaking out in front of those jurors. And he just may be, at the end of this, if she's convicted, he may have a serious talk with Chad. Like, maybe we should go to the prosecution and try and make a deal. But, the death penalty, as many of us know, is often used as a plea bargaining chip. So, could happen.
Gigi, what are your thoughts?
I agree with Kathy. And I know, too, that I've had listeners and viewers of Law and Crime approach me and say I was in with Pryor or I could see him better in the courtroom. And when certain things were put up there that directly related to Chad, they said you could almost see the embarrassment on his face. And these things are going to come in his trial. So I agree with Kathy. If she's found guilty on this, maybe it's time for a talk about saving himself from potentially getting the death penalty. I've always heard the case against Chad was stronger than the case against Lori's, which has largely been circumstantial. So maybe, this front row seat has got the gears turning in John Pryor. We shall see.
We shall see for sure. Linda, your thoughts. Do you think there are any deals to be made when it comes to Chad Daybell?
It's interesting because we didn't really hear in this case who actually killed the children, right? We think it could be Chad, but we would have heard that. We think it could be Alex Cox, but maybe we would have heard that. So maybe the deal will be made because you had the grandparents of JJ in there, right? And we know that, one of them, Kathy and Gigi would know better, there was an ambulance calls. This has to be incredibly stressful on their mental health. And if they know that Chad will go to prison for the rest of his life, turn evidence on Lori in case she decides to appeal her conviction, maybe a deal will be had.
Yeah, I think the only deal that the prosecution, just my feeling on it, would be to take death off the table if he pleads to the murders, because we're talking about 2 children and a wife, his wife, murdered. I mean, I just can't even imagine them saying, oh, yeah, plead to this and we'll let you out maybe in 30 years. I say, no way. I think life without parole is probably the only deal to be had here. Just my opinion. So you heard it from all of us. We're going to take a quick break, but we want you to keep those questions coming to us. So we will be right back. Submit them on Twitter, Facebook, and in the YouTube chat. I'm Anjanette Levy, and you are watching The Lunch Show Q&A on Law and Crime. Welcome back. I'm Anjanette Levy, and we are taking your questions about the trial of Lori Vallow Daybell this hour. We are expecting closing arguments tomorrow. Jury instructions will be prepared between the judge and lawyers on both the defense and the prosecution later today. And with us live from Boise, Idaho is Law&Crime's Gigi McKelvey and Law&Crime Network executive producer Kathy Russin, and also with me is Linda Kenny-Bodden, Law&Crime host and a famed, prominent defense attorney. She's done a ton of famous cases over the years. We are taking your questions this hour, as I mentioned, so keep them coming to us, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. This first question, Jenny Benny from YouTube asks, Gigi, will you be in the courtroom tomorrow? And what was the jury's reaction when seeing that video by the swimming pool in Hawaii of Lori and Chad?
I do think I have a ticket for tomorrow, so I should be in there for closings. The reaction of the jury, you know, it's kind of been watching a progression of them going from absolute shock as things are introduced to being a little more conditioned now to maybe Lori doesn't have much emotion. But they did look at her frequently while that was being played. And I saw one juror kind of just very gently shake her head back and forth. The same juror who actually shook her head back and forth when Lori said that Tylee cleaned her room, so therefore she must be a demonic entity. So I don't think any of this is lost on this jury. They have been so attentive, maybe the best jury I've ever seen sitting in on a trial.
Interesting, very interesting. Our next question is from Timothy Hall Abbott from Facebook. And Tiffany asks, am I the only one that feels as though this is being dragged out terribly? Why not start closing arguments today? What's the point of waiting? Kathy Russin, what is the point of waiting?
Well, they're using today to finalize jury instructions. We see it done differently in trials all over the country. Some judges will take opportunities during a long trial, like if they end early or they don't have a witness scheduled, well, they'll start working on them, but it doesn't look like that happened in this case. So they needed today to get those finalized. Sometimes that can take several hours, so that's why.
Yeah, and these trials are a long slog. So the jury instructions are usually the last thing that they work on because all of the evidence is in, and then they can really start hammering out that roadmap for the jury, if you will, and see if whether there are any instructions either side wants the judge to add to those. Julie Naby from Facebook asked, did I miss the defense's case or what happened? I thought everyone had a defense. Maybe she doesn't have anyone to call that can defend her. Maybe Chad could have been called to defend her. So, Linda, your thoughts on the defense's tactic in this case of really not putting on a case?
Well, let's start with Chad. They could not call Chad to defend her because he is under a criminal indictment for homicide, for murder himself. So that's why the cases are severed in some part. Some part is also because Chad faces the death penalty and Lori does not because of the delay in giving documents. All right. With regard to, I think we touched upon this a little bit, really, what can you say? You try to show that maybe the prosecution have not proven their case. That's really where you can only go here. What else are you going to say? You can't call her. Well, they could, but the quickest way to the jail cell, even quicker than maybe the evidence in this case, is to put her on the stand. You know, the timing can go down. So the defense is going to rely on the burden of proof, especially when it comes to whether or not she was a conspirer to kill Tammy Daybell, and then they'll see where they'll go on sentencing.
I really wanted her to testify. I was hoping and hoping because who else can explain any of this but her? But
maybe
not
you
shocking.
can't explain it.
Yeah, she can't explain it. And another thing, too, I mean, she's got the mental health issues. You know, even though there's no insanity defense in Idaho, she's clearly mentally ill. There were some competency issues. So she's got some issues there. And she's never been willing to talk to anybody about any of this. So maybe not a shock. This one is for you, Gigi. It comes from Kay Jakimsey from Facebook. Were any of Tammy Daybell's children in the court? From what I saw in an episode of 2020, her children blamed Lori for everything that happened.
We haven't seen any of the Daybell children here. And one thing to note, that 2020 interview, I believe, was aired before we got those document dumps that really kind of showed us the participation that Chad had in the extramarital affair. I have heard that maybe 1 or 2 of his kids are not as supportive, but I think maybe that number might be higher after this trial, reading these text messages while their mother was still alive, or the day less than 24 hours after she dies, where he's flirting with her. So things like that may turn these kids from supportive into, you killed my mom and you buried kids in our backyard.
Yeah, and it will be interesting to see if they appear at any of his further proceedings or at the trial, should he opt to go to trial, which at this point in time, they're talking about a June 2024 trial date with much of the same evidence. They discussed that at a hearing last week. Next question, Josephine Burke Staunton asks, will the jury find it strange that the defense didn't feel the need to put witnesses on the stand in Lori's defense? Kathy, they don't have to put on witnesses. They don't have to put on a case. But if you're a juror, don't you want to hear something from the defense?
Absolutely. Now, they will get an instruction from the judge that that cannot be held against the defense because the defense does not have to prove anything in the case, so they will hear that. But come on, they're human, and I'm sure they wanted to hear from Lori. And man, we were back and forth yesterday. There was a time that I thought Lori could take the stand, and I thought she wanted to, and they were talking her out of it. That's just the feeling that I was getting. There's nothing, what could she say on the stand? So, but if I'm a juror, and you have to remember, they actually found 18 people in Idaho that did not know a lot about this case. I didn't think that was going to be possible. So these guys only know what they've heard inside that courtroom, and I'm sure they want, and they have been facing her. Her table faces the jury, so she's face on with them the whole time, and they see her writing most of the time, but they see her little smiles and little giggles. She does a lot of that during the breaks when they're not in there, but for sure they would want to hear from her, or from anyone. Like, what to dispute this? Like, they couldn't bring on one single person to help her out, and that is going to weigh heavily against them, I think.
I kind of have a question, and Linda Kenny Bodden, I'm kind of thinking this is like an Anjanette Levy viewer question. You know, what if your client's just like, you know what, I don't want to throw my brother Alex under the bus. I don't want to throw Chad under the bus. I just want you to, you know, do not much of anything because I didn't do this, and, you know, but I don't want you fingering anybody else or anything like that. So what is the deal from a defense perspective from where you sit? Because I'm thinking to myself, if I'm her lawyer, Alex Cox is dead and can't defend himself, so I'm using him as my fall guy.
Except who may have had the closest relationship with Alex Cox except his sister? Why would he out of the blue want to kill Tammy Daybell? I mean, let's face it. And remember, there is a little ethics rule, and the ethics rule is that you cannot put a client up on the stand and ask them any questions if you know that they are going to lie to that jury. So the attorneys cannot do that. If you have a client who decides, the heck with you, counsel, I'm taking that stand because that is one of the decisions the client has complete control over, then you put them on, but you can't ask them any questions. You can just say, tell your story, or what do you have to say to the jury, or what do you have to say to the judge, and that is it. And that's the ethical dilemma of the attorneys, and probably why they could not put her on, because they know a little bit more about her involvement than we do from her.
Yeah, who knows? I mean, maybe she has told them things that are incredibly incriminating. It's just weird to see somebody just sitting there really not doing much except writing on a notepad and not doing anything to help herself. Okay, our next question is from Lori from YouTube. Wouldn't the text between Lori and Chad, as well as the phone call to Melanie saying Lori knew where the kids were, be enough to convict her? Gigi, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think I've said all along Lori Vallow is going to be the reason Lori Vallow is convicted. And I think the text messages, the body cam videos where she's saying JJ's in Arizona, he's in a movie, all those things just show that she knew exactly what she did was wrong, and that's why she's lying about it. If she really believed this kid was a zombie, she would have said, yeah, we did kill JJ, he's in Chad's backyard, but it wasn't JJ, it was a demonic entity. I don't think that the jury is that naive to think that Lori was clueless as to the location or the status of her kids.
Right, most definitely. Well, we are going to take a quick break. Keep the questions coming. We are going to be with you now for another half hour or so. So Twitter, Facebook, YouTube chat, submit them, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. I'm Anjanette Levy, and you are watching the Lunch Show Q&A here on Law and Crime. Welcome back. I'm Anjanette Levy, and thanks for joining us this hour for our live Q&A lunch show about the trial of Lori Vallow Daybell. We're expecting closing arguments in the case tomorrow, but first, before that, at 3 o'clock Eastern time today, 1 o'clock, I should say, Mountain time, Judge Boyce and the attorneys for the prosecution and the defense will be going on the record to discuss what they've been talking about behind closed doors with regard to jury instructions. Talking about behind closed doors with regard to jury instructions. That, of course, is the roadmap that judges and attorneys hammer out to give to the jury. And this is basically for them to follow instructions when considering each charge and to follow the law. And sometimes there can be little additions made to these, sometimes not. Sometimes they just use a boilerplate jury instruction form, but we'll learn more about that later today. Kathy and Gigi will be in the courtroom for that at 3 Eastern, 1 Mountain time. And of course, we'll keep you up to date on what's in those jury instructions here on Law and Crime, on our YouTube channel, and on lawandcrime.com, our website. We want to get to more of your questions now. This one is from Facebook. It's from Patty Thiel Baker, and she asks, and I'll clean up the language here a little bit, why the heck wasn't her niece, Melanie, also charged? She had full knowledge that Charles was about to be killed the night before he was fatally shot, but she did nothing. That's criminal. She was aware the kids were more than missing, but never alerted the police. Also criminal. She made a deal with the prosecution to testify so she wouldn't be charged, but weaseled out of it. So deal should be off the table. I call for her to be charged. So Kathy, that was a really long question, and more, you can tell Patty's upset about this. So do you have any idea why possibly Melanie was not charged?
People are really fired up about both Melanies, quite frankly, but Melanie Pulaski especially, because we see in text messages and all their communication, Melanie believed her kids were zombies. So she was okay that their bodies were going to die at some point. I mean, it's ridiculous what some of these women around Lori believed. And Melanie knew. Lori said it's coming to a head this week when it talks about Charles and the demon coming out of his body. Now, these women, Zulema and Melanie, they participated in these castings where they, stand in a circle and they try to cast out the evil spirits. So could be that Melanie just believed God was going to help them do that. But yeah, and she was here. She was here for several days to testify, and they weren't getting to her, and and then the prosecution sent her home. I think she's a wild card. I think in the end they decided it was not worth putting her on the stand. Also, I don't know that she has any deal, so I'm not sure that's true, that she has any deal. I don't know. I mean, conspiracy charges, it's crazy when you read a text, and Melanie was so close to Lori that, I don't know. I understand why everybody's fired up about her, though.
Yeah, most definitely. And I think, all four of us are mothers, and all four of us can maybe see at some point in time where our kids drive us crazy. That's part of being a mom, but these children, as far as we know, I mean, they were just children, like poor little sweet JJ. I mean, I look at that little face and I just can't even imagine. Gigi, you've been in that courtroom. I'm sure there are parents on that jury. Your thoughts on Melanie and her involvement or potential involvement?
We didn't really see kind of the depths of her involvement until after she was sent home. We had that FBI agent on the stand who read the text messages where Melanie acknowledges that her children are dark and she knows this is part of the Lord's plan. So I was really shocked that they let her go home. But I agree with Kathy. I think she was a wild card. I think she was very much under Lori's spell, thought Lori hung the moon. And so they haven't seen each other in over 3 years. And what happens when she gets on that stand? Does she clamor up and feel like she has to defend Lori? So I'm with Kathy. I think it was an emotional wild card. They didn't want to risk. They've got enough in there. And as far as charges, it could be one of those things where all signs point to yes, but can you get a conviction? And that's why Chad wasn't charged in conspiracy with Charles Vallow's murder, is because even though he was aware, there was nothing that they felt they could prosecute where they would get a successful conviction. So he had no charges. It could be the same with both Melanies in this case.
Yeah, we just don't know at this point, but it's a good question to ask, no doubt. We're going to take a quick break, so stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back. I'm Anjanette Levy, and you are watching Law and Crime. And we are taking your questions about the trial of Lori Vallow Daybell. She is the Doomsday cult mom. That's what people call her, accused of murdering her son, JJ Vallow, who is an autistic person, or was an autistic person, I should say, her daughter, Tylee Ryan, and Tammy Daybell, the late wife of her now husband, Chad Daybell. Chad Daybell's trial could start in June of 2024. We are expecting closing arguments in Lori Vallow Daybell's trial tomorrow. Before that, at 3 o'clock Eastern time today, we are expecting the court to resume with both sides talking about jury instructions with Judge Stephen Boyce at the Ada County Courthouse, where Kathy Russin from Law and Crime, the executive producer, and Gigi McKelvey, they are camped out outside, waiting to bring us every little bit of news that's going on with the remainder of this case. But we are going to take more of your questions right now. I'll send this one to it's from @Cowgal from Twitter. Could Lori do interviews once the trial is completed? Do you think she will? That's interesting because, Kathy, I'm wondering if there's somebody she could grant an interview to that she feels is, I don't know, godly or something. Is there any type of organization or news outlet that is more religion oriented where you could see Lori Vallow Daybell actually granting an interview?
I mean, I don't know about that part. I don't know that there's anybody in particular that she would trust to do that. Also, we don't know the conditions either in the jail or the prison. Sometimes you can't even do an interview. She could do video chat though, so she could do it. But there's no organization supporting Lori. I mean, come on, who's supporting Lori Vallow? Nobody.
Yeah, I just wondered if she might reach out to somebody, if there's somebody out there that she might like or admire. But she's been so quiet to this point. Why would she give any interviews? I mean, she's never said a thing.
She did smile. She did smile at Gigi in the courtroom. So,
Gigi, okay, tell us about that.
Yeah, I was a little worried. Maybe she was trying to gather me for the $144,000, but I smiled back. I didn't want any bad juju put on me. She does. She smiles at me every day. I talk to her investigator a lot. He's a very nice guy. And so I think she sees me talking with her team and assumes I'm one of them. But, so she does smile at me every day. Sometimes she mouths hi. So it kind of depends on her mood, I guess.
Oh, this is very interesting. I'm really hoping she doesn't think you're a zombie. That would be really bad news, but guess what? She's in jail. Okay, so let's get to some of your questions now. Sorry, it was just too easy. I couldn't resist. @Dashing Sparrow from Twitter says, is it unusual for the defense to not have any witnesses, Linda Kenny-Bodden? I know the burden is on the state to prove all the charges, but I don't think I've ever watched a trial where they didn't call at least one witness for the defense. And does the jury have to be unanimous in the verdict? So 2 questions there from Dashing Sparrow for you, Linda Kenny-Bodden.
Okay. We see a lot of trials on TV, but the normal run-of-the-mill case, as far as you can say they're run-of-the-mill cases, no witnesses are called for the defense, and that happens in courtrooms around the United States every day. The usual thing is for the defense to rely on the state did not prove its case beyond a reasonable doubt. And in fact, even in high-profile cases, I know I'm a big one for calling witnesses, but it's always, one of these give and takes here. Do you think that the burden of proof has made itself way to the forefront for the state? I just think that in today's realistic world that jurors want to hear from the defense in some manner, but it's not the usual situation, believe it or not. Unanimous, yes, the verdict has to be unanimous for a conviction. I think that all the states now require that, even Louisiana, and there was something in Oregon until recently that there were non-unanimous jury verdicts in criminal cases, but that's been changed.
All right. So your question, Dashing Sparrow, answered there. And I think, we're all moms here. I mean, the 2 children, JJ and Tylee, pardon me. I mean, they're your kids. I mean, we're all moms. I know where my kid, he's only 8. I know where he is every minute of the day. And so this woman allowed her children to go missing. They were murdered and did nothing to try to help find them. So, I mean, that just right there makes me think these jurors are going to be like, what was this lady thinking and what was she doing? More questions now from people who want to know what's going on in the courtroom. And Gigi, this question is for you. What is the book that she is reading in the courtroom? So tell us about that.
I have not seen a book in the courtroom. She does have a legal pad that she, the last time I sat on that side, she was near the end of it. She does doodle or write a lot. She could be, rating all of us light or dark. We don't know, but she's very active in that book. Sometimes she'll tap her attorney to look at what she's written, but I haven't seen a book in the courtroom. So I'll keep an eye out for that today and see if I see it.
And I'm sorry, I missed the second part of the question. I apologize, Gigi. It was from Millie Loves God from YouTube. What is she reading in the Hawaii body camera? I couldn't tell, so I think we'll have to zoom in later. I don't know if you've been able to see that, but I haven't been able to see what she was.
Kathy,
you do?
Kathy knows
Kathy?
the title of that.
Okay, Kathy, tell us.
She's reading Visions of Glory. Visions of Glory. It's about a guy that had a near-death experience and talks about seeing into heaven. So right up her alley.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Oh, okay. So there's the book for you. All right, Charlie Roper from YouTube. Will closing arguments be live streamed with audio or on a delay, like it has been for the duration of the trial? So Kathy, fill us in on that.
Yep, still delay. We don't get it till the end of the court day, unfortunately. Media did ask to do closings live, and we were denied. So the good news is we're going to get the verdict live. So that's the best case scenario that we could have hoped for, because we didn't even think that was going to happen, but not for closings.
Yeah, it would be so nice if we could stream the closings, because after that, the jury will begin deliberating. So it doesn't seem like there would be any harm there. Chico's Mummy from YouTube, Linda, asks, have they proved all three elements of the conspiracy charges? What are your thoughts on that, Linda?
Really interesting, because the murder, I think the homicide of the children, I think that's to me, that's a no-go. And I'm a defense attorney, right? Check that box, yes, guilty, as far as I was concerned. The interesting thing about Tammy Daybell, I think what links her on the conspiracy charge is the text that all three of these viable, wonderful, terrific human beings, two children, and also Tammy were obstacles. And I think that word in that jury room is going to, for most of those jurors, if not all, say, yes, she was part of the conspiracy to kill the wife of her now current husband, or then current husband, who, by the way, her kids ended up in his backyard. So I think the jury is going to find yes on all three charges.
All right. So there's your expert, your defense attorney expert weighing in on this, Linda Kenny-Bodden. At Beauty and Blood 1849 from YouTube asks, I'm honestly curious if she is still trying to do castings since she's been locked up. If the defense is that Chad manipulated her, then it would be interesting to learn whether or not she's still practicing their new religion, and she put in parentheses, AKA cult. So do we have any idea, Gigi, about whether or not she still believes in all of this zombie stuff, and that she's a goddess who's going to lead the 144,000?
The last I heard, she does. I mean, I've heard. I've talked to somebody who was in jail with her who said that at one point she looked and she had socks on her hand and was talking like they were sock puppets. So I don't know. I mean, it's so hard to tell with her what is fake and what is real. She's lied so much throughout her life. But I really do think that I don't think she has a clue what's coming with this verdict. The last I heard, she thought she was going to be acquitted.
Kathy, you and I were talking about this.
About that.
Yeah, because you and I were talking about this the other day. So you think she does believe all this stuff. So I guess sock puppets, whatever. I don't know. Go ahead, Kathy. Really quickly. We have 45 seconds.
Okay, a couple things. Chad's the one that rated people light and dark and would tell Lori. So I don't know if Lori has the ability to rate people light and dark and do the castings on her own. Secondly, I firmly believe that she 100% still believes that her kids were possessed. I believe that. I am not convinced that Chad believes that, but I think Lori believes that.
Interesting. Well, it'll be interesting to see what the jury ends up believing out of all of this, and we'll find out soon. Everybody, thanks for being with us. Gigi and Kathy, thanks for being with us. I'm going to turn it back over to Linda Kenny-Bodden after this break. Stay with us. You're watching Law and Crime.